Well, why don't we get started? Again, thank you so much for joining us for this 8th conversation around ranked choice voting. My name is Ashley Houghton. I'm the communications director at FairVote, and I am thrilled at the number of people who are excited about 2021. I hope you leave today's conversation feeling energized, ready to pass ranked choice voting reforms across the country on a local, on a national level. As I mentioned, this is our 8th conversation, and you can find the previous 7 on FairVote's YouTube channel. We're going to be recording today's conversation, and you'll be able to forward it to family, friends, and colleagues after today as well. We also see this as an opportunity to discuss ideas. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please use the Q&A and the chat functions, and you can go ahead and leave those at any time during today's conversation. Our FairVote team, thank you, Emily, will monitor those fields throughout the conversation and flag them for us as presenters. We're going to spend a bit of time looking back on 2020, but also what we can see in the future. And also, unlike our previous webinars, everyone that you see today is FairVote staff. So if you're driving work around ranked choice voting and you want to share it, please do so in the comments. We want to uplift your work. Today, we're going to be talking with Deb Otis, who is FairVote's senior research analyst, and she's going to share a bit more about what elections we saw using ranked choice voting in 2020 and can tell us a bit more about what to expect next year. Katie Dahl is our FairVote outreach manager, and she's going to share a bit more about how you can get involved in any advocacy that might be underway near where you live. We have Dave Daley, FairVote senior fellow, who will talk about next year's redistricting battle. That's going to be the big word of the year in 2021, right? Redistricting. And then lastly, we have Khalid Pitts, FairVote senior vice president of programs and advocacy, who can share a bit more about what we can expect in terms of political advocacy in 2021 and FairVote's 2021 plans as an organization. And then, of course, we want to leave room at the end of this discussion so you can ask what questions you might have from FairVote staff. So, Deb, let's start with you. Could you share a bit more about elections that use ranked choice voting in 2020, and what did we learn from that experience?
Sure. Well, the biggest thing to note is that 2020 was huge for RCV. It all started in the spring when we had the first ever use of ranked choice voting in presidential primaries. So there were the 5 states that used this for their Democratic primaries and caucuses. And we saw all of the things we want to see. We saw strong turnout, good use of rankings by the voters, and positive responses. And so we're really looking forward to hopefully expanding presidential primary use in the future. And I'd say, as far as lessons learned, one of the biggest lessons we learned from those primaries is that ranked choice voting and vote by mail are policies that really go hand in hand. They work very well together. With so many states having to switch their primaries to entirely vote by mail this year, we saw a huge number of wasted votes in the non-ranked choice states. This happens when a voter puts their ballot in the mail 1 week or 2 weeks before Election Day. And by the time Election Day comes around, that candidate has dropped out and that voter doesn't have their voice heard. The ranked choice voting states solved that problem. And so having vote by mail along with ranked choice voting, we learned a lot about how that works, and it's a really positive policy. And so we're definitely looking forward to more of that. But that's just the spring. Let's get into the elections in the fall. We saw about 40 ranked choice voting elections this November across 9 different jurisdictions. A couple of big ones include the first use of RCV for presidential general elections in Maine. Maine does their electors by congressional district, and so we saw ranked choice voting used in the statewide race and also in each congressional district in Maine. So that was pretty exciting. We also had a first-time use in Benton County, Oregon. They got to use ranked choice for the first time, and we saw great returns, and we saw more voters voting in those races. These were county commissioner races than we had seen in Benton County in past years. So people getting involved in these races. And then it was also used for mayoral elections, city council, school board, etc. I think a trend here was strong voter turnout, a diverse set of winners. Of all the winners in these 40 races, almost half of the races were won by women, and we also saw really strong performances by candidates of color. And so lastly, in addition to the many elections that used RCV this year, we also had the ballot questions. So ranked choice voting was on the ballot 8 times in 8 cities and states, and we won 7 of them. So I know we covered those questions in an earlier webinar, so I'll keep it brief. Get ready to add a lot more cities to these lists of RCV elections in future years.
Thanks. And what election should we be keeping an eye out for in 2021?
Well, I'm really excited about the 5 cities which are scheduled to use RCV for the first time next year. One of the big ones is New York City. When New York is added to our list of RCV cities, it will basically double the population of Americans who are voting in this method. So it will be huge for us. The race that everyone is watching is the New York mayoral race. They'll be having their primaries in June. And it's looking to be a really crowded field. So it's the kind of election where if we did not have ranked choice voting, we could elect someone with maybe 20% support from the voters, which does not feel like strong democracy. So we are really excited to watch that mayoral race. But even before that, there are a few special elections for city council seats coming up in New York City that we'll be keeping an eye on as early as February, just a few months away. So that's one of the new cities. There are several others. I would say keep an eye out for East Hampton, Massachusetts, Bloomington, Minnesota, Minnetonka, Minnesota. These are all cities where voters already approved use of ranked choice voting. They voted on ballot questions in the past, and this year they'll get to use it for the first time. So we'll be watching those elections closely. We can make some predictions here. I anticipate strong turnout, for an odd year, more representative election results, and strong voter satisfaction with the process, which is what we often see once voters get to use ranked choice voting.
Deb, your enthusiasm is contagious. I'm so excited. And I hope that others are able to celebrate with us throughout the year, which gets us to outreach and partnerships. Katie, this gets into what we can expect in different parts of the country in 2021, but also what kind of organizing is happening on a local level. There are a number of people on this webinar who are part of state efforts. If you haven't already, I encourage you to share the work that you're doing in your state. If your group is planning future work and you want to share it, please do so. But Katie, how can people get more involved and organized?
Thank you, Ashley. Hey, everyone. I am Outreach Manager Katie Dahl at FairVote. Thank you, Deb, also for all that great news. I just want to first say that so many of our allies out there in the country were responsible for all those RCV wins and elections that were run using RCV. And so it is my pleasure to be able to talk about some of our partners out there in the field and point you to those groups working towards ranked choice voting in cities and states all over the country. So there is a lot of work happening still out there, and most of it is being done by our allies. There are state organizations working on efforts to pass laws in their states through both the legislative process and the ballot initiative process, doing the painstaking work of making sure these campaigns are set up for success over multiple years. There are groups that are building the base of support for ranked choice voting through education and by recruiting supporters one by one, and now innovating through online organizing tactics, finding people where they are at home during the pandemic. There are organizers increasing support in their communities by building relationships with other organizations, bringing leaders of these groups together to plan the best path forward for electoral reform where they are. And so just to name a giant handful, there is exciting work going on in Washington State, in Texas, in Washington, DC, Illinois, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, Virginia, Maryland, Florida, and many other places. A lot of folks have already chimed in on the webinar in the chat and in the Q&A about work happening where they are. You can also go to our website, fairvote.org, and navigate to the Get Involved page. You'll see some options for actions to help the cause for reform, including a link to a page with a list of state and local groups and how to connect with them. We can also drop it in the chat here. I also want to say that it is a privilege to know some of these leaders. They are most of the time doing this work before and after their day jobs, and the level of commitment and passion and expertise that they're demonstrating are absolutely worthy of your connection and support. So I would encourage you to reach out and find those groups that are doing this work in your state. And I will drop that link in the chat right now.
And so speaking of local engagement on ranked choice voting, 2021 is going to be a huge year for redistricting. Dave, could you share a bit about what we should expect with the new districts? So for background, the census was taken during the pandemic, and we're likely to see some battles around new district lines. Is that correct?
I think that's right. I think we are going to see fierce battles over redistricting over the course of the next year, and again, over the course of the next decade. We were still litigating the maps drawn in 2011 as far into this decade as 2019. So this is a fight that is going to be ongoing. Pleasure to be with all of you today. A pleasure to see so many real heroes of a democracy on the participant list. So hello to all of you. We are looking at what I think will be really perhaps the most severe decade of partisan gerrymandering that we have ever seen in front of us. In 2020, there was a lot more than just the White House at stake. The state legislatures that were elected, the down ballot races last month, really determined the authority to draw new lines after the census numbers are released to states in April for state legislatures, as well as for congressional districts. And what we learned in 2011 is that the combination of all of these forces that have been unleashed on our politics, whether it's gerrymandering and geography, political polarization, the kind of technology that is available right now to draw these lines, it has become possible to draw district maps that lock in an enduring advantage for an entire decade. And what we saw is that the maps that both Democrats and Republicans drew back in 2011, whenever one party had complete control over the entire process, they lasted for an entire decade. And that's fairly new. Ordinarily, those maps, the power of the lines would tend to fade over the course of a decade as political issues evolved, as people moved, as people died, as new voters registered. And whether you're looking at the Democratic maps in Maryland or the Republican maps in Ohio and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and North Carolina, it just didn't happen that way. And we elect these members for 2-year terms, right? There's a reason why. We don't want to elect them for 10-year terms. So the lines that are drawn should not have this level of impact and choose winners and losers for a decade. And really, that is the fear here, that could happen once again. At the end of the 2018 election, you had more than 59 million Americans who lived in states in which one or both chambers of the state legislature were controlled by the party that won fewer votes in the 2018 election. And that really is fundamentally antithetical to the idea and the notion of representative government and the consent of the governed. So what's different this time is that there is no longer going to be the fear of a Supreme Court decision that could keep parties between generally accepted guidelines. The court back in 2019 called partisan gerrymandering a non-justiciable political issue. It's effectively closed the federal courthouses to these claims. So the politicians who are drawing these lines next year will be able to, essentially do whatever they please without fear that the court will weigh in and impose some kind of fair guidelines. It means that the fights will move into state courts, most likely, which, as we've seen over the course of the last 6 weeks, have become increasingly polarized and partisan as well. And I think we're likely to see a real extended fight over the use of citizen voting age data as far as drawing state legislative lines. The ability to, instead of counting a total population of states, you're seeing a lot of interest in Texas, in Missouri, elsewhere, in using citizen voting data. So that is effectively only counting documented citizens over the age of 18, which would have a dramatic impact as far as making populations older, whiter, and more rural in many of these states.
So it sounds safe to say that 2021 is going to be a bit of a mess when it comes to the redistricting battle. Could you share a bit more about the solution that FairVote poses? I think the challenge with all of this is that the hurdles can feel systemic and insurmountable, and systemic problems require systemic solutions. So could you share a bit more about what FairVote proposes?
I think that's right. The problem is systemic, and it is surmountable. But it requires really looking at what the fundamental problem is. And we have to define the fundamental problem here as single member winner takes all districts. That is where the fundamental root of the problem begins to take hold. And that is what we really have to fix. Better lines don't necessarily lead to fairer or better representation. What we want to propose, really FairVote's gold standard here, and what I think is really the gold standard for fixing the root problem of partisan gerrymandering, is the Fair Representation Act. And it's been introduced in the last 2 Congresses by Congressman Don Beyer of Virginia, co-sponsored by Ro Khanna of California, Jamie Raskin, Maryland. And really what it involves are larger districts, so that the district lines don't matter as much. And they are represented by multi-members, so 3, 4, or 5 members of Congress representing these bigger, larger areas. And we use ranked choice voting to select these members. So as a result, you end up with something much more proportional and fair. This is the people's house, and it ought to reflect the actual makeup of the population. The problem that we have is that there are sizable communities that simply don't have any power because of this fundamental issue of single member winner takes all. I'm here in Massachusetts right now, not far from East Hampton and Amherst, that'll be using RCV. There are plenty of Republicans here in Massachusetts. We have a Republican governor, but Massachusetts has not elected a Republican to Congress since 1994. It has been said that it is impossible to draw a map that would elect a Republican. Munduchin of Tufts has taken a look at it, and it's almost impossible to do. But if you were to have multi-member districts, you would probably see 5 or 6 Democrats, maybe 1 or 2 Republicans, perhaps an independent or a third party member. You would see much closer, clearer representation of the actual public will. And that would be the same in Oklahoma or Kansas or states where there are plenty of Democrats living, and yet they are not actually able to elect a member of their own choosing. This would have profound influence on our politics. These states that are electing complete unanimous slates of partisans, they're incentivizing the politicians differently. They are elected out of these non-competitive districts. They have no reason to talk to anybody else. And when you can run and win in states like this, we would be electing new members of Congress incentivized to behave differently once they actually get there. Perhaps they would be more inclined to work together, to form coalitions, to actually solve problems. I mean, our nation is not as politically segregated as we think we are. It's these zero-sum, a winner takes all single member districts and the maps that reflect that have created this reality. We can change it. The Fair Representation Act is the way forward.
Dave, that's so encouraging, and it is clear that the rules of the game don't work for all Americans. And so how do we improve the rules so that we aren't in a system that incentivizes bad behavior or locking people out of the public discussion? This gets into FairVote's role and how do we hope to be impactful. So Khalid, I'll turn to you. We have big plans at FairVote for 2021. Could you share a bit more about our strategic plan and how we hope to engage folks like the supporters on the call?
Sure. Well, first, let me say thank you for everyone for coming, and happy holidays from across the 50 states. To looking at the chat, even across the pond in Ireland, Deb Otis, my colleague, led us off with some great, holiday cheer and spreading the word of, what we got this November in terms of ranked choice voting and wins across the country. I hope to spread that cheer over the next, here at FairVote, spread that cheer over the next 4 years, and how we are going to win the democracy reform battle for 4 years to come and years afterwards. And FairVote has looked at this from sort of a 3-point standpoint. First, I think the big thing and highlight in what Deb talked about is moving the conversation around ranked choice voting from an hypothesis to theory. We're going to move that conversation from just being a thought experiment, which is a phase we're in. We're past that phase to an implementation one. It's actually happening across the country in big cities and rural towns across our country. And FairVote is going to actively work to spread that with our advocacy campaign and to highlight that. And we're going to work actively to pass RCV measures on the federal level and on the state level, whether it's around RCV, using presidential primaries, as Deb talked about, or legislation that makes using ranked choice ballots easier to use and tabulate. But knowing that is, what we're doing right now is sort of grounded in the now, but we're also looking towards the future. And that's another big goal of ours, and alluding back to what Dave just talked about in the Fair Representation Act and proportional voting, we see the future of true democracy reform is proportional representation. And what we're going to be doing over the next 4 years and years beyond is building that coalition of the willing that is ready for the moment when it comes for us to enact, whether it's going to be called the Fair Representation Act, which we've been introduced by Representative Beyer, but whatever it's called, we're going to be passing proportional representation on a federal level to impact how members of Congress in the House are, both how they are voted into office, but also who they represent. And we're going to try to win that argument from an academic standpoint. We're going to win that argument from a constitutional standpoint. I saw in the chat, someone asked about a 3-member, district. Is that constitutional? We're going to win that argument from a representational standpoint. Not only the representation of those who are in office, but those who are engaged in the election to get them in office. And so that we are all truly represented. And we're going to win that argument from an electoral standpoint. When it goes from just thought to theory to implementation, we're going to help support those candidates who support ranked choice voting and who support proportional representation. But that's not just done from a grass tops level or thought leaders. That's really done, and that's why all of you are on this call and what Katie talked about. That's done out in the field. That's done in states and locales across this country, and the groundwork that you guys are building, that foundation. And the third big pillar of FairVote's work over the next 4 years is movement support. Ranked choice voting, just like every other movement, evolves. And we see this movement evolving, becoming more engaged with volunteers, becoming more professional organizations, building up their capacity and their strength. And we want to be there right there with you across the country and supporting the evolution of the RCV community. That's one of the reasons that Katie is leading our work in building a broad-based and community-based library resource center where FairVote material is there, materials from across the states and from other national partners are there to help everyone build capacity and build a stronger movement in their states and their locales. That's why we are going to be concentrating and building up our capacity and our help desk so we can help those fledgling groups out there find, build capacity, or those volunteers who want to get connected with a group or an organization in their state. Where do I go for that to lend my support, my thoughts, my ideas? That's why we're doing that. I think the other things we're doing, we're going to try to build better analytical tools. As we, as a movement, get more evolved, we as a movement are getting better at analyzing what we're doing well and what we're not doing well, and learning from that, and creating that sort of learning environment and those learning tools that FairVote's going to try is going to work to help build into our ecosystem. And I think lastly, in terms of with regard to the sort of national movement, we talked earlier, we led off this conversation again with Deb talking about how it's being passed, where it's going to be implemented. We and our comms department led by Ashley is going to be working to sort of spread that word, to have with working with the national media outlets and state media outlets to show this is where RCV is being utilized. Again, it's not a thought experiment. It's being implemented right here and right now across this country. And we're going to be building a program to tell that story, to tell that narrative, to help lift all boats as the tide rises. So those are big plans for the next 4 years of FairVote. We're excited about the work we're going to be doing here nationally, and we're even more excited to be helping you do the work and engage in the work you're doing in your states and locales.
I love being part of an organization where people are just so enthusiastic about a solution. You know, there are so few things to feel really excited and enthusiastic about, or at least it can feel that way. And so to be around really thoughtful colleagues who are being part of the solution is really pretty extraordinary. I'm very lucky. So we have so many questions, and I love questions. Before we do that, I want to acknowledge the overwhelming movement of support for ranked choice voting. Again, if you are working on something that you want to uplift, we have more than 100 people here on the webinar who are all interested in learning more. Please put it in the chat box. We'll also include a roundup of opportunity in our follow-up email to attendees. So if you're looking for a way to engage, we're going to take advantage of that. I'm going to start with a couple of questions that we've received on proportional ranked choice voting in the Fair Representation Act, and then move into some areas of work that we can see in 2021 and beyond. So Dave, a couple of questions for you to start. So from Michelle Whitaker. Hi, Michelle. As commissions or legislators draw new maps, what are some good ways to get ranked choice voting to be part of that process?
It's a great question. You know, I think that what we have seen is that citizens want more involvement in this process, right? I mean, in 2018, you had 5 states that passed really important reforms around redistricting. 2020, Virginia was added onto that list. And Virginia did not have an initiative process. And so that had to happen because citizens organized and spoke up and lobbied and demanded this kind of change. And really, I think that that is the kind of response that we're going to continue to need. The victories on this front that could be won through statewide initiative have really been won. There are not many initiative states left. So if citizens want to step up and fight for this, they have got to organize themselves and demand change. The good thing is you can look around the country and see examples from state after state where this has happened. This has happened across party lines, where it's happened across generational lines, racial lines, and where it has been victorious. and not victorious even in a close way. We're talking about big 60, 70% wins in a country that appears so polarized in presidential elections and other ways that there's very little that we can agree on at that level. But ranked choice voting and gerrymandering are seen as these key structural problems that are getting in the way of fair representation. And I think there are a lot of fixes that we can still advocate for, even though we now know which parties are going to be in charge of this process, and continuing to fight for ranked choice voting and making it easier. And once people have the ability and the power to rank their ballots, they want to do it. And they want to do it in all of their elections. And they don't understand. So if I can do it for mayor, why can't I do it for Congress? So I think all of these fixes are tied together. We give people this power. They want it. They like it. They see the impact. And then they also want to embrace it for every other election that they have. And so all of the organizing work that is going on, whether it is, in Oregon or Massachusetts, in Maine or in Alaska, it makes it more possible for us to win these bigger long-term victories going forward.
It's the potato chip of the electoral reform, right? You can't just have one. You need to expand it. So that gets into the sticky question that's always constitutionality. So can you share a bit more about constitutionality of multi-member districts, and how does this fit in with our Constitution?
It's absolutely constitutional. All Congress would have to do in this case is simply pass a law. There's a statute right now that requires single-member congressional districts, but states have had multi-member representation in Congress in the 20th century. That statute is fairly new, and a simple vote could change it. So there is no constitutional problem there whatsoever.
That's wonderful to hear. And then actually, Dave, while we have you, we are in the middle of a holiday season as well. So we're in the middle of Hanukkah right now. We're looking ahead to Christmas soon. If people are looking for stocking stuffers, say books on electoral reforms, Dave, do you maybe have one or two that you could recommend?
I most certainly have a number that I could recommend. Ari Berman's Give Us the Ballot is a terrific. Carol Anderson's A No Person, No Vote, I think is really wonderful. If you're interested in my books, I will not say the title of one of them on a family Zoom call, but there's one on partisan gerrymandering that begins with the word rat, and then there is a more optimistic look at the Citizen Fights Back that's called Unrigged that came out back in March. Great stuffers.
So let's move on to ranked choice voting writ large. Deb, we received a question talking about America being divided, in part because its political structure is so binary that we're really stuck in these either or camps. He wonders whether, to escape from this habit of always thinking in dichotomies, should we express our opinions in a way that, let's say, is like top four, or you express your top four opinions? I think what our reaction to that would be, the solution is ranked choice voting, right? So could you share a bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that question is hitting on something really important here about how our politics are so binary. We're stuck in this dichotomy. Our elections have become so polarized between these two poles that seem to be getting farther and farther apart. No wonder there are so many voters who feel like we have no voice. And so, yes, absolutely. We need to be able to express more nuanced preferences. We don't just want to vote for one and cross our fingers and hope that's good enough. We need to be able to rank choices. We need to be able to express multiple preferences. And it's not just from the voter's perspective where we want to be able to express multiple preferences. we also want to see that diversity of thought represented in our elected bodies. And so this gets back to the Fair Representation Act, the multi-winner form of ranked choice voting that Dave was talking about earlier. We need more perspectives reflected among our elected officials, in addition to us voters feeling free to vote for more diverse perspectives on our own ballots.
And I have a bit more of a local specific question. So from David Goodman in New Jersey, the Represent Us and Coalition Partners campaign will join ranked choice voting with open primaries. So Deb, I'll share this question with you. What do you think of the open primary combined with ranked choice voting combination?
That sounds like a really cool coalition that you're building there in New Jersey. That's great. So for places that want to move to open primaries, we think that RCV is a no-brainer there. We think that it really strengthens the open primaries proposal to include RCV. This allows voters to have more ballot choices from a wider mix of perspectives on their ballot. And this is what Alaska just passed. Their statewide ranked choice voting question is open primaries, and then the top 4 candidates advance to the general election using RCV. And I love that. I love putting the top 4 winners into the general election rather than just a top 2, because at that high turnout general election, we get more perspectives on the ballot and more choice for voters. So good luck in New Jersey. That sounds like a very cool coalition you're building, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
Then we have a question about how we get this done. So Khalid, I'm going to turn to you on this one. Jonathan Perlow. Hi, Jonathan, up in Connecticut. Can you share a bit more about how we might diversify the political ideologies that support ranked choice voting? So I think there is often an assumption because of previous dynamics that one party prefers ranked choice voting to another. This question asks specifically, how might we get more GOP and conservative-minded people on board with ranked choice voting as an election reform?
Well, I would first preface by saying that we have to talk to everyone about it. I would hopefully these last 4 years will not be the norm of how we can have conversations across cultural, economic, and even political seemingly divides between us. One of the things that we're going to be doing at FairVote is making a concerted effort to talk to conservatives or people who consider themselves Republicans because of how they vote. I think whether you're Republican or an independent or green, you want a truly representative democracy, and that every vote counts and that everyone can get engaged in the process and feel like their voice is being heard. But as Deb talked about wins that we had, although it didn't show up because it wasn't on the ballot for this election, but there's great things happening in Utah. I think city of Provo and other cities across that, or counties or towns, I should say, across that state are engaged in it. This is an issue about democracy. And, when our republic was started, not everyone was fully invested in democracy, both women, people of color, and slowly over time, as we continue to become that more perfect union, more have become involved in the process. And it's the same thing with ranked choice voting. That is an issue about democracy. And over time, as we have conversations and engage legislators, engage other citizens on this issue, they will come around because they see as a benefit to them and the issues they want to move forward.
That's true. And if you're interested in learning more about how conservative, Republican, and libertarian-minded folks support ranked choice voting and third-party candidates, take a look at some of our previous webinars. So we've had a webinar specifically on the conservative case for ranked choice voting, and others on the implementation of ranked choice voting across the country and what impact it has had on people from all across the political spectrum. So let's look ahead to 2021. And Deb, we got a question from Michael Houghton. What is the status of the February ranked choice voting challenge in New York? So what can we expect being duked out in the courts?
It's a good question. That lawsuit was just filed a few days ago. So I think we're still seeing how exactly it will play out. An important thing to note here is that the lawsuit is primarily about whether New York City has done enough voter education in order for this implementation to proceed on schedule. It's not really about the merits of ranked choice voting itself. It's not trying to overturn ranked choice voting. It's about, should it be delayed? Is the implementation being rushed? And so I think that we'll definitely be keeping a close eye on that, but we're seeing a lot of support among groups in New York City that are doing a lot of voter education, and they are advocating to move ranked choice forward as scheduled because of the increased voice that it's going to give to voters as early as this February. Just recently, there was a group of over 20 women candidates for city council races in New York City that got together and signed on to a letter asking to keep ranked choice on schedule, move it forward for February implementation. So we know that there is a lot of support for making this happen. There are groups doing really good voter education right now in New York City, and we're very optimistic about it moving forward.
Thanks. And another question for you. Could you, and this is from David Patchen, could you cite any recent examples of how a plurality leader ultimately lost to a majority winning candidate who won with widespread support?
Sure. It sounds like you're asking about come from behind wins, where the person who ultimately wins the election was not leading in the first round. I could go on for a while here. You asked about one of my favorite elections from this November. There was a San Francisco Board of Supervisors race. That's their city council, where the ultimate winner is a person named Myrna Melgar. She was in third place in the first round. That's only the second time this has happened in the US since we've been tracking these. It's really rare to see a third place to first place win. But the reason we see this is because Melgar continued to pick up a lot of support from second choices and third choices. She ultimately ended up winning in the fifth round. I think this one is really notable because before ranked choice voting, San Francisco used to use a runoff election. So only two candidates would advance to the runoff. Melgar in third place would not have made it to the runoff. But we checked those ballots. She is what's known as the Condorcet winner. That just means, based on the ballots, she would have won a head-to-head race against every other candidate in the race. So we have ranked choice voting here, electing this consensus candidate who had a lot of popularity and broad support, where other voting systems would not have elected that person. So that's a pretty powerful example. We also, a big one I think of is in Maine in 2018, they elected a congressperson, Democrat Jared Golden, in the second round, and that was a come from behind win. So that was 2018, 2 years ago. This year, Golden ran for re-election, and he won by a much bigger margin over his Republican opponent. So we kind of see him having that narrow come from behind victory and then cementing his place there going forward.
Thanks. I'm just organizing questions in the wings as well. And Emily, please feel free to keep them coming. I think we'll probably be able to answer questions for another 5 or so minutes. We want to make sure that as many people have answers as possible. But here, let's start with, and anyone have a feeling about pressing local school districts or children activity groups to include ranked choice voting in their curriculum or procedures? I think that putting forward the principles of ranked choice voting and including this in the elections of our children when choosing class presidents or team captains would lead to a discussion of how it works and why it's better than plurality elections. And then these kids can go home and tell their parents and so forth. Randy, I think that you're building a movement of young people, which is wonderful. So maybe Katie can share a bit more about what we've seen with younger people in the movement, but I also know that there's been a swarm of universities that use ranked choice voting in their elections. So I'll defer to any of my esteemed colleagues who feel prepared to respond to that.
I was just answering a question in chat, Ashley, so I did not actually hear that question. So I'll defer to others, or maybe you can repeat it.
Sure. Deb, if you have additional thoughts. We actually have a blog post on this, on the number of universities that have implemented ranked choice voting for student elections. I'll see if I can find that and maybe share it in the roundup of resources that we pass along to attendees after today's webinar. There's also a really interesting study that came out of the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center where they took a ranked choice voting ballot to a middle school and asked them to, I think it was rank their favorite holidays. They gave them no voter education ahead of time. They just put it in front of them and said, hey, rank your favorite holidays and we'll see which one wins. They found that the ballot error rate was extremely low. It was the same rate as you might see in a standard election. So it was illustrative that not only do kids get this, they understand it intuitively, and they don't even necessarily need the kind of voter education that you might expect for them to be able to really take on ranked choice voting seamlessly. We've seen this across the country when it comes to things like ranking your favorite beer at a brewery, or the way that we use rankit.vote, which is an online app and platform where you can create your own ranked choice polls as a way to illustrate that ranked choice voting isn't just a way to cut through the political chaff, but also a way for us to make apolitical group decisions together that are more representative. So if you, like me, live in DC and you recently saw that there was a new panda baby that was born in the National Zoo, and there are 4 different names for that panda baby, you don't feel as if you have to select the one that other people are more likely to choose. You can choose the one that you want and rank your second choice, knowing that a vote for your favorite doesn't inadvertently help the name that you hate, that you hate the most. So there are all of these opportunities that we can integrate, whether it comes to kids or family members, or picking out your favorite restaurant among a group of friends, or which Netflix show you plan to watch together, where you can start to integrate these tools to illustrate that ranked choice voting is helpful in a political context, but also just in group decision making. I will go back up to the top. Earlier, one of the panelists said something about all of the places with strong ballot measures having already passed. Was he or she referring just to municipal elections? No. Deb, do you mind doing a bit of an overview on the ballot measures that passed this year?
Yeah, absolutely. One big statewide win in Alaska, and 6 municipal wins. 5 of them took place in November, and one of them was earlier in the year in Portland, Maine, and it kind of slid through in about March. But the November ones included 2 cities in Minnesota, so it's Bloomington and Minnetonka, 2 cities in California, Eureka and Albany, and 1 in Colorado, Boulder.
Really exciting. And then Dave, I'm going to go back to you with a multi-member district question. So Paula Lee asks, are we going to be able to bring the idea of multi-member districts into the conversation where citizen redistricting commissions will be drawing districts soon, like in California, or will we be shut down with, we are required to draw single member districts? Will we have to wait another 10 years when new maps are drawn, or can we get started soon?
I think we have to use the conversation that we're going to have about redistricting next year to begin showing people why multi-member districts and RCV is a better way forward. I mean, is it possible that this will happen next year? No. We would need a law to be passed, and that is probably a long shot under these current political conditions. But we can begin to do the groundwork that gets us into a better place on all of this. And during a year in which we're going to be talking about redistricting and mapping, I think what we want to do is show people how our politics would be different if we were able to do this transformative reform that would truly give everyone a more meaningful voice in what is supposed to be the people's house. We have it within our power to make just about every district in this country a swing district, to make every vote in every state meaningful. And we have to begin to do the work of explaining it's not just about fair maps, it's about fair representation. And you get a fair representation by doing away with the root problem, which is single member winner takes all.
Just to add to that, and earlier I was talking about our 4-year plan. Redistricting and the conversation around redistricting is part of our multi-year plan. over 12 years to pass proportional representation. And looking at the long game, let's just say that. And one of the things we're going to do, and Dave talked about map making, is what diagnostic and sort of tools that we can bring to sort of showcase this. Not only things we can showcase those to thought leaders and those who are working in redistricting, but to share those tools and that analysis with you in the field so you can have this conversation. So we're not only having these sort of top-down conversations with grassroots leaders, but you're having the same sort of conversations and knowing the information that we're sharing with them so you can have those same conversations in your state and your locales as well.
And actually, I'll put in a brief plug for a report, and I'm not going to release the results of this report, but I want everyone to keep an eye on the report that we're coming out with later this week. So on Thursday, we're going to be releasing the 2020 iteration of the Monopoly Politics Report. So in 2018, we guessed the results of 82% of House races. You can find out how accurate we were come Thursday, but historically, we've been able to guess them between a couple of percentage points just because the country is so polarized. And so we see this as an opportunity to really set up the conversation around proportional ranked choice voting and key electoral reforms. I'm going to give a quick shout out to Deb for authoring that report along with Alyssa from the Law and Policy team. We're going to slowly close things out. I think we have room for maybe one more question, but as we close out, I just want to thank everyone for participating today. This has been a really extraordinary conversation, and one of the things that I love about this movement is that everyone is so thoughtful and engaged. It's great to be part of a movement of people who are excited about the possibilities of electoral reforms. One question that we received from Bart is a concern about sham candidates, a real and serious one. So Dave, I'll pass this along to you because we've talked about the Rodriguez case in Florida. And so if people haven't heard this before, maybe you could share a bit more about what was experienced there and how that could have been solved with ranked choice voting.
Yeah, I think that's right. The Rodriguez case is, it's a state legislative race in Florida that had been, super close in recent years, one of those competitive districts, and suddenly there was an independent candidate with the same last name as the incumbent, who did not actually have a campaign, didn't actually raise any money, wasn't doing events, didn't show up for debates or even return the newspaper's a candidate questionnaire. It was clearly there simply to try to confuse voters, and it has been, it's been demonstrated in the weeks since that that was the case, and it shouldn't be the case. I think what we have seen over the course of this last year, both parties attempting to weaponize libertarians and Greens in Montana and Pennsylvania by, creating candidates and putting folks on the ballot or funding ballot drives of candidates who aren't even interested in running. And this is being done solely in the position of trying to drain votes away, siphon votes off, and to give themselves more of an opportunity to win. And if these states were using ranked choice voting, we're not even talking about these kinds of shenanigans and just a weak, embarrassing nonsense that has no business in our elections. If you have a ranked choice voting election and the candidate needs to get over 50% in order to win, you take away the idea of the sort of third party independent spoilers siphoning votes away and creating the possibility of someone winning with less than 50% of the vote. You can have all of those choices without the possibility of a split outcome like this. So I think that the fact that we are seeing this used as a political weapon more and more by both parties in a growing number of states speaks to the urgency of ranked choice in so many places, that it is not only about better representation, it's about better elections.
That's such a wonderful note to leave this on. Thank you, Dave. So I want to thank our panelists for their thoughtful responses, and thank you so much for the opportunity to have this discussion in the first place. We'll post the recording of this on YouTube tomorrow morning. This has been a really fun series of webinars to watch, and I've always been on the audience side of these, so it's really selfishly quite thrilling to be on the other side of the camera. We really appreciate everyone's participation in these webinars. We launched them as kind of an experiment in COVID times of, does this make sense for us to lift up? Would people even be interested? The response has been beyond extraordinary. So with that, we're actually going to take a bit of a break. We're going to pause on webinars until the new year and start to reassess what topics people would be most interested in. If you RSVP'd yes to one of the webinars that was hosted this year, you're going to receive a survey. So we really encourage you to answer that survey. Have you liked these? What do you wish could change? What topics do you wish you could see in 2021? How have these engaged you? How have these made you think about the work differently? If we see a consistent topic, or if we hear that these are really helpful, we're going to revisit these webinars in 2021. And who knows? Maybe even post-COVID times, we'll find these that have been really helpful to connect with people across the country. So if you have any questions, please feel free to follow up with us. And again, an enormous thank you to the panelists, but also to Emily, who has been hosting all of these in the wings and facilitating and answering questions, and often doing a million different things that you aren't able to see right now. So thank you, Emily, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your December season. Talk to you.